The Pentagon making a big strategic shift, abandoning its $500 million program to train moderate rebels to fight ISIS in Syria. Welcome to Risk and Reward. I'm Deirdre Bolton. Fewer than 100 fighters were trained in total, and during a Senate committee hearing in September, officials said only 4 or 5 U.S.-trained rebels ended up fighting. So this is a far cry from the 5,400 projected. The president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, Jasser, with me now, as is retired Gunnery Sergeant Jessie Jane Duff of the U.S. Marines. Zudi, I'm starting with you. Based on what you know about the conflict in Syria, is the Pentagon's shift to providing support to vetted rebel commanders a better tactic? Seems like anything would be better.
Yeah, I mean, we need to be on the side of good in this conflict, and today's announcement that we're pulling away from the passive-aggressive nothing that we've been doing is basically another whisper in Putin's ear that, go ahead, you have the green light to do what you want, massacre whatever you want, because we're not going to do anything in there. And the most insulting thing is for them to be telling Putin, well, you're going to be entering a quagmire. He's not in there to help solve the problem. He is the problem with Assad. They want to massacre populations. They want to allow ISIS to thrive. They're not in there to get after ISIS. They're in there to protect the military regime of Assad and their continued decimation of the Syrian population. So today's message from the White House is just more appeasement and more sort of signals that America is completely out of the game. The good guys have nobody on their side.
So I want to pick up on one of the points that you just mentioned there with Jessie, this idea that Putin is not at all worried about collateral damage. I am not saying the U.S. is perfect, but obviously does try to prevent civilian casualties when possible. Obviously, hitting that Doctors Without Borders hospital was a big gaffe in Afghanistan. But you have been in the line of fire. What do you see happening in Syria with all of these presences?
It just looks like complete disorganization. I mean, we have to recognize $500 million went down the drain for no results. Essentially, 54 trained Syrians went in to fight, and many of them were attacked by al-Qaeda, and essentially they ran, fled, or were taken prisoner. So we lost all of that. They were supposed to get a minimum of about 5,000 fighters a year, up to about 15,000. What this suggests is that you cannot train people to fight your war. You cannot give them the motive and the desire, because our Western ideals are not the same. They did not want to go fight ISIS. They wanted to defeat Assad, and we didn't appreciate that. What it boils down to is that these rebels want to get rid of Assad because of what he has done to their people, what he has assassinated them, murdered them. Well over into hundreds of thousands of their civilians are dead at his hands, and they have been incapable of getting rid of him with minimal or no support from us.
And as far as somebody who has been on the ground, I mean, what is your best advice? We often talk about this disconnect, whether it's business or government, between leadership and the people who, in this case, will literally be in the trenches. What would you say to the U.S. government?
Well, what's happened is that this administration has failed to listen to the leaders that are in the Pentagon. So now we have a situation where we have had no substantial improvement or success in Syria, and we are now watching what the Russians are doing, and we can't stop it. What happened with a lot of these missiles is that they went into the region of Hama, and they actually went into Aleppo and shot out one of the weapons depots that had been backed by our own CIA. So the Russians know exactly what they're aiming for, and they're going after the Assad rebels, the ones that want to get rid of the Assad regime. They're not going after ISIS.
Zudi, I want to bring you in on that point, talking about what targets Russia is hitting, because apparently Russia was aiming for a few targets in Syria, but ended up hitting some in Iran. So are the Russians not as strong as we think they are?
Well, one of the reasons they're doing this is to get the rust off of their weapons and start to get involved in a hot conflict in order to help a fellow thug, Assad. And we have to now they've denied it, but they're going to do that because Iran is their closest ally in Syria. So they want to call. It's interesting. The Russian Orthodox Church is calling this a holy war, which is Putin's church. And on the other hand, they're fighting alongside the Khomeinists, the worst Islamist theocracy on the planet. So this isn't a holy war. They're going to package their propaganda Syria, the way it fits their narrative, and for the American government today to say, you know, we're backing away from the rebels. A few days after Russia decimated the rebels and the depots, as Gunny just said, that we were actually helping is telling them, you know what, oh, we don't want the implication that this is a proxy war against America. We're going to step away and let you put Assad back into power. And to say that America in 2015 doesn't have the capacity to determine who's good and help this Arab awakening continue towards democracy is a sad day for freedom.
And it seems as if the Russian Defense Ministry is just as spinning. I mean, they've released pictures that show terrorists in Syria trying to bomb mosques, but the Russian government is saying, well, they are doing this to implicate us, and I am just assuming, Jessie Jane, that this would be means or motive for retaliation.
Oh, absolutely. This is a classic standard that all is done with many terrorist groups. What they do is they hide behind civilians, and they use civilians to protect them. And then when they're shot, they get this international uprising of saying this is horrible. And the Russians are trying to get in front of that and say, look, we're not touching the mosque. Now, considering that the Russians are not the most honest people, brokers in this, I wouldn't be surprised if they do blow up a mosque and then deny doing it. I don't know if this press conference that they did or this release they did was to circumvent maybe something they will be doing. But they have armed near these mosques, and it looks like they're going to try to give the impression that Russia is attacking their religious places of worship.
And she's exactly, Jessie Jane's exactly right, because the Assad regime has decimated 500 to 1,000 mosques in the past 2 years, and ISIS has also of the Shia Alawite variety. So bottom line is Russia's going to continue the evil that Assad is doing and then say, oh, no, wait a minute, that wasn't what we were doing. That's ISIS that's doing that, and use their propaganda to spin it.
All right. We're so glad for both of you. Thank you. Zuhdi Jasser joining us there, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and retired Gunnery Sergeant Jessie Jane Duff of the U.S. Marines.
Thank you, Deidre.
Focusing